All right, we are live. I am super excited for today's webinar. And just for everyone coming in here, I'm going to just kind of be here for a couple minutes before we get started. Can everyone hear me okay? Can you guys go ahead and comment in the chat? So we're doing Zoom tonight. And so there's a chat and then there's also a Q&A. So I see stuff in the chat. Sounds great. Awesome. You guys excited? This is a webinar that I have been, oh man, I'll tell you all, this is more personal and more about me than anything I've ever done. So excited, nervous, everything in between. I can't wait. I'll give everyone a couple minutes to file in. We're going to go ahead and, Zoom is pretty cool because they have this Q&A function. I'll talk about it in a minute, but I'll just go ahead and start talking about it now. There's a Q&A function up the top, and I'm going to do a Q&A at the end. I'm going to tell my story, talk about everything, and I'm really excited. This is going to be the best TED Talk ever. I'm not going to be as active in the chat. I think it can sometimes get distracting for me. I'll try to tune into it. But again, we'll go ahead. I think let's see how we're doing on time. You guys can see my screen. So if I actually post the chat right here, so if I'm looking at the chat, can you guys see that chat right here or just my screen? Just my screen. Perfect. So all you see is the slides. You can see the chat. Okay. Okay. Then I won't even look at the chat. I'll just kind of ignore it. And I'll go ahead and get started. And then as people filing in, then they can sort of see where we're at. So again, questions, like I said before, there's a Q&A section on Zoom. So there's a chat section. I won't be looking at the chat. At the very, very end, I'll go ahead and do a Q&A and I'll talk about, whatever you guys have for me. This is an exhausting webinar for me. This is me. And, this is going to be a little bit more vulnerable than I typically get in a webinar. And so I'm not going to do a super long Q&A afterwards, probably 30 minutes, a lot. And so I'll go through the Q&A questions that you guys post throughout the webinar. And, then I'll sort of pick the ones and we'll sort of use our time wisely. But yeah, I'm not going to be super, into the like super long Q&A this time. Like I was last time, I think I answered 100 questions. I don't think I'm going to do that this time. So for those of you who don't know me, we didn't do any external promotion of this webinar. So I'm assuming that you know who I am, but just in case, I'm George Hariri, and I graduated from dental school back in 2018. So I'm a 2018 grad. I bought my practice August of 2018. And that was exactly almost 2 years ago, like 2.5-ish, not even quite 2.5. I've grown the practice 2.5 times in the last 2 years, and that's a big part of this webinar. So I won't say much more about that. And I'm the CEO of Shared Practices. So really, I'm representing our company tonight. And if you've been to a webinar that I've done before, it's been joined Richard Lowe at Shared Practices. And, that's always how I've introduced myself. And that's always how I've thought of myself was, Richard's little brother. He's older than me. Matt's older than me. And I always viewed myself as a little brother kind of helping out with the business. And it's been a process for me to really walk into the role of leading the company. And, been called a CEO for a while now. I've done webinars and I've never talked about it. And for me, I think I'm talking about my journey tonight, but I'm talking about Shared Practices. And for me to be the guy to do that, I don't think there's a bigger honor I've had in my life, if I'm being totally honest. Being the one to represent this team that we have is truly incredible. So I'll start with Shared Practices. And, that's where everything started with Richard Lowe. Back in 2016, he started a podcast called the Shared Practices Podcast. I'm sure you've heard of it. And, he set out on this journey of exploration. That's kind of what I think of it as. He was in residency at the time. It's funny. None of us owned practices. Matt, me, Richard, when we started, even Alex Sharp, our director of Mastermind, no one that's now a big part of what we do back when Richard started the show was a practice owner. And, he set out on this journey of exploration. He's like, I got some years in the military here. He's still in the military. Geez. And, he's like, I'm going to learn about practice ownership. And that was 4 years ago. That was over 4 years ago. So much has changed. And the shared practices that maybe shared practices, I call it Shared Practices 1.0, that, Richard started that. And some point along the way, we've evolved. And we're just a totally different company today. And, I call this Shared Practices 2.0. This is what started as, Richard's exploration really ended in discovery. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is that. So I'm going to ignore the chat. I see it buzzing. I'm hoping you guys are having a good time. I'm going to stay on point. So I have never actually sat here and told my story. I've talked about it on air. It's come up here and there, but yeah, I've never once sat and told the full story. And I remember so we have our director of coaching, Suzanne Rassi. You might have heard of her. She's part of our team. She actually leads our whole team of coaches at Shared Practices. And, I remember one time I was sitting in a conference room with her and we were talking about a lot of what we do right now. We have a lot of internal jargon and we were going over a lot of the shared practices, like analytics-based practice management philosophy that we believe in. And I was getting really excited about it. And I was sort of telling her all about, things that we can do and how everything happens. And I could just tell that she didn't totally she understood what I was saying, but I don't think she understood how much it meant to me. And so I sort of sat her back, we were just talking there. We just kind of sat back and we said, okay, let me just tell you like a 40-minute story. And I talked about my whole 18 months at that time of ownership up until the time that we were talking. And she really told me, she goes, wow, you like, I needed to hear, why has no one heard that before? And that it just hasn't happened. I've never actually told the story. And for me, it's uncomfortable. We were in Monterey for a quarterly retreat and we were changing up let me check the chat. It's really buzzing here. Okay. I'm going to see if I can mute this thing. So we were in Monterey for a quarterly meeting and we were sitting around the table. And one of the reasons why we're doing the webinar tonight is we're actually increasing the fee of our coaching, something we've been manning to do for a long time. And in Monterey, we were going to do it over Labor Day weekend, kind of silently and not really tell anybody about it. And I guess one idea I had was I've never actually told my story. So a lot of the product services that we offer doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so I really just sat there. I'm like, maybe I should tell my story, do a webinar, talk about my whole first 2 years of ownership, everything that's happened, and talk about our products and services. And I was expecting a lot of objections because for me, that's a super uncomfortable, very foreign idea. I've never wanted to be the guy at the center of attention. I've never wanted to be, talking about myself. And everyone at the table in Monterey is just looking at me and nodding their head. They all want this. I don't. They all want this. So here I am. So yeah, for me, it's super uncomfortable. And we added a core value at Monterey. We had our meeting, vulnerability and success and failure. And so at Shared Practices, we want to embody vulnerability in success and failure. And for me, I think in this story, you'll hear both sides of it. I mean, I think I've failed in ways that many dentists haven't. And I think I've been successful in ways that many dentists haven't. I don't think there's much in between on my story. And the reason I'm telling my story is threefold. So one, I think it's interesting. I think you'll enjoy it. Two, it tells the story of our company. You can't understand what we do and why we do it without understanding my story. And then the third thing, and this is really what I hope you get out of it, is that this isn't about me. This really isn't. I want you guys to live in a world of possibility. Right now, everyone's entering the webinar thinking something is possible. They have something in their mind that they think is possible for themselves in ownership or in dentistry or whatever. I'm assuming most people here are some relation to dentistry. And this isn't look what George could do. This is look what you can do. And so 3 things I want us to take away from the webinar today. 1, I think my story is really interesting. And my hope is that you all listening to it will take away the thing that you need to help you in your life immediately. Some lesson that you can take from my story, I think you'll take. The second thing is I think you'll understand our company. A lot has changed. Shared Practices is totally different now than it was before. And you get to learn about that. And then the last thing is you might leave thinking something is possible that you might not have thought was possible before the webinar. So those are the 3 things that I think you might walk away with. And without further ado, I'm going to jump right in. I am actually showing my own PBN snapshots. So I don't know why. For me, this is just my preferred way of communicating because then I don't have to say like my practice did blah, 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 blah. I can just show you. And we'll have case studies at the end. You'll see clients that have worked with us for a while now, and I'll show their PBN snapshots too. I have all of their consent. And so I always use adjusted production. So that is the measure for me that I care about the most, production and insurance fees. I believe that is, with a rapidly growing practice, the most accurate way to assess its performance, because collections, there's always a lag. And then you have your gross production is pointless because your insurance write-offs really matter. So I always use every screenshot you'll see, unless I mention otherwise. There's one case study where I will mention a gross production, but everything else is adjusted production. Okay. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So August of 2018, I bought my practice. And I remember, so there's 2 points in my life that I would think that was the most overwhelmed I've ever felt. So the first was I was 23 years old and I had my first child. So my son was born, and it was not my plan to be 23 with a kid. I'll tell you that. And I'm sitting in the hospital and I'm holding this kid who doesn't stop screaming. And I'm thinking to myself, what did I get myself into? I am so screwed. And that was, yeah, that was my introduction to parenting. And it's been this crazy experience that it's not the topic of the webinar today. And the second time I felt that was May 30th of 2018. I was still a 4th-year dental student. I was going to graduate the next day from dental school. And I go into this office to meet my staff from the practice that I just, was about to buy. Paperwork was signed, loan was done, like it was happening. I couldn't back out of it without repercussions. And I'm sitting around the table with 6 people that have all been doing this for much longer than me, who are much older than me, very intimidating. I'm still a dental student. And I'm introducing myself. The practice was doing about 90K per month, about 1.1-ish, like 1.08 the year before I started. And that was super intimidating to me. I mean, I'm coming from doing dental school level of dentistry with dental school fees. I had no clue what 90K a month was. And I thought, okay, I'll keep it simple, right? I'll get to know my team, know, like, trust. And I said, I'm only going to do one thing. I'm going to implement this thing that we call co-diagnosis, which is essentially working with your hygienist closely with an intraoral camera and talking to patients about treatment. That's all I was going to focus on because I was overwhelmed. To say rapid growth, I feel like is a big understatement. So we've later come to understand this phenomenon a lot better. But for the purpose of the story, I won't fully explain what happened. If you know it, it's called the honeymoon stage, but I had it on the slide last slide. So, July of 18, right? That's kind of baseline. That's right before I walked in with ownership, practice doing about 93 a month, right? That's kind of what we talked about 90K per month. And then month 1, we get a bump of like, I don't know, 30% or something. We're doing 122. And then by month 3, my 3rd month of ownership, we did 156. And I had financial goals beforehand. And I can tell you for certain that almost double, I mean, that's like a 60-something% growth in a practice in 3 months. That outblew my wildest expectations. And it was so exciting watching that month happen. And man, just everything that I had ever dreamed of, practice ownership was just so exciting. I loved it. And the growth was just like, oh man, it was the biggest level of excitement I think I can remember in my practice ownership was that seeing that 3rd month happen. Then I got my accounting statement after that 3rd month. And, right, everyone has an amount of money that they want to make, right? I think for me it was a 400K. And that was the first month that I just blew it out of the water. Like I almost doubled. I think I did about double that amount of money annualized. And so that was like, oh, okay, all the goals you had, everything you worked so hard in dental school to accomplish, your 3rd month of ownership, you're there. And you would think that, right? They have the picture of the mountain here on the slide. You would think that this would be like the peak experience, just like unfathomable level of joy I experienced. It couldn't have been further from the truth. So I remember October in Arizona is just like this beautiful time of year where there's sunsets and the weather is great. And I had a 1.5-year-old son. Him and I are walking to the park. I'm working 3 days a week. I'm getting out at like 4 or 5 o'clock. And I'd live 6 minutes from the office. I would go home, take my kid, go to the park. He'd go down the slide and watch the sunset and making great money, doubling my income expectations, my income goals. And I just felt so empty. I remember one time I was walking with him and I remember exactly where I was. I remember thinking to myself, why am I just so unhappy? This is not at all what I want with my life, but this is every goal I've ever had accomplished. And I started seeing a therapist, started working on myself. And one of the big things I'd realized in hindsight was that I was not being myself as a practice owner. I was the primary producer in my practice, and I experienced being a solo doc for about a week in the month of September. I hated it. It just wasn't for me. And I don't know why not. Some of you guys really like being clinically busy, clinically producing. For me, being the primary producer in my practice, it doesn't matter how much money I was making. It wasn't ever for me. So later that month, same month, right? Geez, a lot of things happening in October of 18. It was a big month of my life. I will say one more thing though, before I move on. I would say that of the turning points in my life, October of 18, personally, professionally, in every single way, that realization that I am not happy really was fundamental to our philosophy of pursuing it your way. It really started that month. And we'll talk more about that later. But October of 18 is a month I'll keep coming back to. So just remember it. My seller was retiring. I had my seller as my associate. She was working for me. She said she'd be working for me for a year. So I'm 3 months in. Things are going really well. And now she's like, oh, I'm leaving. What do you mean you're leaving? The day I started in the practice, she has 3 daughters. 2 of them got engaged. The first day I worked there. Like, are you kidding me? And then she wanted to retire early to plan their weddings. And now, she's, I think, a grandma now. So that was brutal. And I was between this crossroads, right? I just bought this practice and we just did 156K. There's no way I could do 156K by myself. And so I'm like, wow, I am just like the best practice owner ever. Can't stop this guy. So I'm going to hire a full-time associate and push forward. 160, 170, wanted to keep going. Spoiler alert, it took me a very long time to hit 160. What do I mean by that? The production crash. So I almost don't want to tell you guys why, because I think you got to experience this the way I did. January, I was by myself in the office. February, my associate starting. So January, we did 147K, like 150. I kind of hovered around that area from October until January. And then February comes. And, during that time, I'm gearing up for an associate. I'm taking marketing expenses on. I'm trying to grow to like 170. And then my practice tanks. And I went from 147K to $104,000 overnight. My expenses at this point are about $104,000 a month. And I was so confused. I saw it coming. Luckily, I was a PBN power user, a practice by numbers power user. And so I saw this coming in December and I was trying to stop it. And I did everything I could, 104,000. And this began what was the most challenging part of my ownership career. Not even close. So the next 6 months, I flipped. I mean, freak out is an understatement. I mean, this list of things I'm about to go over that I implemented and did in my practice, I did in like 2 months. After February, I had a kid. My youngest son, his birthday is January 29th. Had a kid. February, I come back into the office and I am guns a-blazing to try to get back to doing about 150 a month. Whew. So what did I do? I hired a scheduling coordinator to fill our hygiene openings, expanded our hygiene capacity. I worked on our hygiene productivity. I installed a cone beam. I did construction on my space, like blew out walls, paid cash for a cone beam, anything to get that going. Added implants. I started offering Invisalign, just adding my procedure mix. Everything I was taught or thought to do to grow a practice, I did. I'm sure I did more stuff than this. We started an employee handbook because I don't know how we thought that would grow a practice, but somehow we thought it was a good idea. I then organized actually, this one was super solid. I organized my supply ordering process because my margins were so slim. Like I was making nothing. And so I was like, okay, if I could save a couple grand a month on supplies, like that's probably super solid. Like that's rent at my home. So that's where I was at. And we did new marketing, new website, aggressively online marketing, tons of postcards. I raised my fees. I started renegotiating with insurance. I did it all. I mean, that's an understatement. I threw everything I had at the practice. I did not know what to do to make it to grow. And what did I get? Nothing. Just nothing. 5 months later, in that 6-month period between February, March, April, May, June, July, I think it was a 5-month period, really. I lost money 3 of those months. I mean, for a dentist to be doing over 100K in collections every single month and lose money, it's insane. It doesn't happen. I don't know anyone else that's done that more than 3 times in their career. And I did that 3 times in a 5-month span. I mean, the level of stress that I taken on all these expenses, thinking my practice doing 160, 170. And now I got to practice doing 105 to 110. And I mean, I remember this is the darkest hour of my ownership. I was telling Suzanne the story, and she sort of stopped me and she goes, I see why you do what you do. It's to help you when you needed it. And I firmly believe that that's probably a big motivator for me, is doing what I do and our company doing what we do is really to help this guy. I was so stressed, stuck, confused. I had no idea what happened. Brutal. It just sucked. I remember every single day before going to the office, like just this tightness in my chest, wondering if I'm ever going to get out of the situation. I wasn't sure if I had to fire people. I did not know what I had to do to get out of this. My only options were fire people to cut my expenses or somehow grow my practice. And I wanted to grow practice. I was pretty adamant on that. And I was all in on my goals and I was doing everything possible to grow, and it wasn't going anywhere. I used to go to the gym every morning before work because I was so stressed, and I'd sit in the steam room before I went to the office every day and just tell myself, like, it's okay. One day you'll get out of this and you'll get to where you want to go. Every day for 6 months, and you guys know I'm divorced, and in the middle of this, marriage is falling apart, new baby, 2 kids. It's my butt getting kicked by life right here for a 6-month period. Brutal. And I had an epiphany, but we'll get to that in a minute. That was my year 1. So year 1 of practice ownership. If you look at just, month 0 and month 12, you're thinking like, okay, like that's pretty normal, right? Like a new grad buys a practice doing 93K per month. After a year, he's got some mild 20 to 30% growth, like good year. And oh, that was not the experience of it. I remember I was on the phone with an online marketing company, and I told them, I bought a practice about a year ago, and we're about 20% to 30% growth. And in my head, I'm thinking like, I'm pissed because I was at 70% growth and now I'm somehow down to 20, 30%. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to move it. I'm stuck. And I remember them saying on the phone, they were like, oh, wow, that's really impressive. And in my head, that was the furthest thing from where I was at. I mean, you're talking about somebody who, I had been on a podcast about practice management since a third-year dental student. The way I mean, if you guys have heard me talk about this either on Dental Friends with Benefits or Shared Practice podcast, the I'm not good enough thing, that's a, that's a big part of who I am. And, I guess, my demons. And that was loud and clear. I did not feel like I was good enough. I had no idea what I was doing and I was stuck. Yeah, this was brutal. So that's, the question that I have for you guys, that feeling of feeling stuck, not knowing what to do, just like trying so hard to grow your practice and have it not move. I know it so well. If any of you guys know what that's like, it's about, for me, the most frustrating feeling as an owner. And I put myself in such a bad situation because my practice grew so quickly and then it tanked. And for those of you who don't know, there's this thing called the honeymoon phase. And so what happens is when you start as a new owner, this is around the time. So June of 19, this is the epiphany. This is around the time I started figuring this stuff out. So I realized that the reason my practice tanked 6 months ago or 4 months ago, whenever that was because when you walk into a new practice and you do diagnosis case acceptance really well, which I said was my first priority and the only thing I really focused on for those first few months, you end up diagnosing a ton of treatment on your recare patients and you get this inflated amount of doctor production. And so I thought that was sustainable growth. And that was just like a little peak. First time you're seeing everybody, you're diagnosing all this stuff. But then the second time you see them, you've already diagnosed it and done it. And so there was this unsustainable level of doctor production that I will just never have seen again in my practice for my recare pool. And, I think talking about that motivation I have to coach myself going back in time, there's so many things I would have loved to have done differently and use that cash flow rich period to invest in sustainable growth long-term, which is now the way we handle a honeymoon stage. So June of 19, back to where we're at in the story, I had my big epiphany. And this is the epiphany that really created analytics-based practice management, which is our practice management philosophy. It really created just the change of my practice. My experience of owning to date had been try really hard, push really hard, practice doesn't move. And this was the first time I was introduced to a philosophy of ease and allowing your practice to move by doing the right things. And so what I would do often, I mean, if you think about this, like I'm someone who thinks about things a lot. And I'm racking my brain for 4 or 5 months trying to figure out what happened to my practice. I go from 150 to 105 overnight. Like, that's very unusual. And I had no explanation. I had no clue. All I knew is that I was stuck. And so for the first time, I looked at my practice differently. And I thought, okay, let me take my patient flow, input it into this projection. And I kind of just did this projection. And I said, what would you expect a practice to produce off of your patient flow? And I put my input in, my hygiene revenue in, my patient flow numbers in, and then I output in my little projection on my calculator 115K, which is almost exactly what I had done that month in June. And I thought, oh my gosh, my practice is performing exactly how you'd expect it to. And that was the first time that my mindset flipped from what am I doing wrong to, oh, this is performing exactly like you'd expect it to. So let me change the way it's performing. And it's that concept that really began the way we coach and the way we see. And I was so focused on how are we doing things? How are we verifying insurance? How are we doing all the little things in my practice? If you go back to that list of things I implemented, they were all like system-based how-tos in your practice. And the thing I totally missed is I was so close. I was missing 2 pieces. I had insufficient patient flow for the number of doctors I had, and I had poor new patient quality. That was it. That was the first time that I really felt like I saw my practice clearly. Just like October, like 2018 was a big turning point in my life, June of 2019 was a huge turning point in my experience owning my practice. It was the first time I felt in control. And this is one thing that a lot of our clients feel when they coach with us is like, wow, you feel calm. You feel like you're in control of your practice and you're driving it versus sort of just a passenger not knowing where it's going. And so there was this huge breakthrough in ease, clarity, focus. I just knew I had to do 2 things. I had just done 15 things and got no results. I just finally figured out I needed 2 things. And that's what introduced us to the concept that we now call the who, what, how hierarchy. This is very essential for how we coach and believe and everything about the way we run practices is who, what, how. So let's think about what I was doing year 1. I was so focused on how. How are we verifying insurance? How are we talking to patients about treatment? How are we doing everything? And it was all how. If you go to the Facebook groups online, everything is how. It's like, how do I pay an office manager? How do I bonus my hygienist? How do I? How doesn't get you anywhere. Ask me how I know. Doesn't at all. So we created the who, what, how hierarchy. So who, that's you, leader of your practice, right? That's the glasses you use to see your office. Are you in the right mindset? Can you see it clearly? Can you see your practice the way it needs to be looked at? Are you the leader in the right place to make the decision? Who? Then what? Now that you can see your practice clearly, what do you do to grow it? Then how? So the who, what, how hierarchy. Let's talk about my situation, right? My mindset shift was I was thinking about how what was I doing wrong was what I was looking for. And the reality is my mindset shift was it's performing exactly like you'd expect it to. The things, the what that came from that after I looked at my analytics differently, I was able to see the what are 2 things: insufficient patient flow and new patient quality. Those are my 2 things I had to work on. Only then do you focus on how to do them. And everyone has different things. Like listening to this webinar right now, I hope you do not take away, oh, okay, insufficient patient flow, new patient quality, going to explode my practice. That's not the way this works. It's whatever your practice needs to explode your practice. My practice, I'd already done so many other things that the only thing I had left was insufficient patient flow and new patient quality. So then I spent the rest of that year, so from June to 2019, working on 2 things. I had just spent 2 months working on 15 things that were probably much harder to do than these things. I mean, if you ask my hygienists, the ones that were there between February and June of 19, it was the most turbulent time in my practice. I was implementing so many things. My team members were pissed. They probably don't even notice June of 19 to December of 19. They probably don't even notice. And in this time, I turned over an associate. So I had an associate that left. I got another one started in December who's with me today. And I have and we'll get to that situation with associates. I have 2 now. But patient flow, new patient quality. I worked on two things. And still, the rest of 2019. So, one thing we talk about with our philosophy is it takes about 9 months. When you identify the right thing to do, it takes about 9 months. And not everyone has one or two things. Sometimes it's more, but this takes 9 to 12 months to grow. So, still, my highest month to date was 156, October of 18. And no month in 2019 did I hit 150. I was living in the 120s, 130s of all of 2019. And then it was time for me to make a 2020 goal. And I said I wanted to do 2 million, which would be 166 a month for 12 months. I had yet to sniff 150 again, but I felt the momentum. I felt the difference. I knew I was in control and I knew we could do it. So the relief January 2020 that I had, indescribable. So I like this little like Macintosh thing we got here, this graphic. And, 165, we started to ramp up finally. And, if you think about 2 million, that's 166 per month. So this was the first month that I felt this huge sigh of relief. I finally had things in place. I had 2 dentists now, myself working 3 days a week. I had a full-time associate. I had 4 hygienists, the proper number of patients. I had high new patient quality, and my practice was starting to grow. And this was the first month that I felt this huge wave of relief. October of 18, I did 156. I never sniffed 150 again until this month. I knocked out 150, and then I got to 160. And for me, I don't know why I have these like benchmarks of like 10,000 increments, like 160, 170, 180. Like they're just numbers I like to hit. I don't know why. And man, the amount of relief I felt at this time, I felt like 2019 was just the most brutal year for me. And at the end, December of 2019, I saw it coming. I saw everything coming together. I'm like, okay, 2020 is going to be a good year for me. And, I thought, okay, I took it on the chin in 19. Never want to do that year again. And I thought 2020 is going to be a great year, right? March of 2020, this was going to be my victory lap month. So part of my divorce was that we had to pay ourselves from the practice a year-to-date earnings in November of 19. So did that, paid myself. I hadn't paid myself since November of 19, and I was planning on paying myself after this month of March. Because for me, I had so much uncertainty in my practice that I was terrified of the idea of paying myself because I had lost money so many times. I didn't want to be in a situation where I paid myself too much and then lost money. So I was a little traumatized. So I waited like 5 months to pay myself, or 4 months between November and March. And so March was going to be a really big, and I say was going to be because we all know what happened in March. I'm getting there. It was going to be a victory lap for me. The first 2 weeks of March, I remember I went to I had a bachelor party that weekend. My buddy was getting married, and it was that weekend of COVID. Everyone remembers like March 17th, that whole weekend. And I remember driving to that bachelor party, and I was thinking to myself, finally, like this is my victory lap month. I am so relieved that my practice is where I've always wanted it to be, where I always thought it could be. And this was the month that I felt like I could really get to where I wanted to go in my practice. And, the one thing we were on track to do, I think we were due about 217 is kind of where we're at. I thought we were going to do 220, but it didn't look like we were going to quite hit 220, but we were going to be really close. And I was wanting to break 220. For me, it would have been my first month breaking 170, 180, 190, 200, 210, and I was pushing for 220. I had never touched any of those numbers. I did 166 in February. I was going to do 217 in March. And this is where I say growth is not linear, not even close. Growth is the result of doing the right thing, having everything rowing in the same direction for a period of time, and then it hits you like a ton of bricks. March was supposed to be my victory lap, ton of bricks, celebration of growth, write myself a big check. COVID. Oh man, that weekend, I wasn't watching the news. I don't watch the news. I had no clue that COVID we went from NBA games on Wednesday of having 20,000 people in an arena to no more than 10 people in a room. Got to close your office down for a month and a half. Man, if words can describe how frustrated I was, I had just taken it on the chin for a whole year. I finally get my practice to the point where this is my victory lap. This is the celebration month. I was going to pay myself finally after 4 or 5 months, and I was going to enjoy it. And COVID just took that away from me so fast. I had a 2-week period. There's a reason I don't talk COVID a lot. And part of it is how frustrating it was for me. Just the obviously COVID was, a very big event in the whole world, but what it meant to me personally was it robbed me of the victory that I felt I had achieved. It just totally robbed me. And I never got a chance to enjoy it. 18 months in, I finally figured it out. Now my practice is closed. Ugh. I sat my team down during COVID and I told them, like, guys, I have some money in the bank. They didn't know why. They didn't know what I was going through. They didn't know I had, been so unstable in 19 and finally got stability. And I told them that I'd float them for as long as I could. And I was planning on, at the beginning of COVID, I told myself, all right, like, you'll get another big check one day. But this big check that you were going to write to yourself, that goes to your team to make sure that they all still can pay their bills and everything like that. So that was the conversation I had with them. I sat them all down. This is before PPP was a thing. This is before unemployment, before all that stuff. I had no clue what to expect. And I just told them, all right, like, we'll just make sure that I'm going to do everything I can. I have this money in the bank I've saved, and we'll just try to find a way to make it back. That was COVID. And 6 weeks, I was out of the office, and that gave me a lot of time to think. And the same way October of 2018 was the realization for me of, being the clinical producer wasn't for me. I told myself that I was going to be I kind of pivoted to being very productive on 3 days a week and then having a full-time associate. And during COVID, I went to my office only Wednesday afternoons, saw some emergencies, seated some crowns. I don't even know if I'm supposed to say I seated crowns, but I seated crowns over COVID. And I loved it. Man, COVID for me was a really, really unique experience of getting to see what life is like without going to the office every day. And I had finally got my practice in a stable position. If COVID had never happened, I would probably still be working 3 days a week with one full-time associate and do nothing differently. It was really comfortable pre-COVID. And I realized, and I had so much time to think. No one could do anything. I lived by myself. Like, I had my kids a couple days a week, but other than that, I was by myself. And I realized that I've been feeling this obligation to be a dentist when I don't think that's what I was meant to do. And COVID gave me that space to really realize that and sit with that. And I think a lot of times, one thing that's been missing from the story to date is all the uncomfortable decisions I've had to make with my staff, with everything else. And this one, when you have this realization that you know what you have to do in your practice, it really hits you like a ton of bricks. It hits you and you feel like this pit in your stomach. You're like, crap, I got to have this conversation. I don't know if you guys have ever experienced that, but it's one I know well. And I think the moment I realized that I did not want to go back, man, I was like, my team is going to be so disappointed. And I sat them down and I told them that being a full-time entrepreneur, that was for me. And that was for me what having it all looked like. If you think about October of 18, that month where I decided that making a lot of money a way that wasn't for me, that's not what I want. I would rather, and honestly, I would rather lose money 3 out of 5 months doing it the way I want to than make a lot of money doing it someone else's way. And so for me, COVID, it was kind of like culmination of that feeling of, wow, maybe my path is a full-time entrepreneur and not really practicing dentistry. And I was so terrified of that. And I remember I sat my team down and I told them, I said, guys, the hardest thing I've ever had to tell you was that I was getting a divorce. They had worked for a husband and wife team before I had bought the practice. My ex-wife and I were both dentists. We were a husband and wife team. And I said, this for me is so much harder. And I just was honest with them. And I said, the line I used was George, the owner, is firing George, the dentist. And I said, I'm not meant to do this. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I know it's not this. And so I was going to hire a full-time associate to replace myself as a dentist in my practice. And this is where, this is one of many, things that we truly believe in at Shared Practices. The path to get to where you want to go, the who, what, how hierarchy, that we tell you, it's not hard. It's uncomfortable. And I would call this the most uncomfortable decision I've had to make as an owner. You talk about, me working a half day per week. I work Wednesday afternoons. I see patients. Matt works a day and a half per week. Both of those decisions aren't hard. They're just extremely uncomfortable. And a lot of the things that you have to do to get to where you want to go, they're not hard. They're just extremely uncomfortable. And as a company, we want to be the company to embrace helping you see that things are not hard. They're just uncomfortable and helping you go through the discomfort to do the thing. So I did the thing and I replaced myself. And then June of 20, I finally got my victory lap. We did 219 in June of 20. So I got my 170, my 180, my 190, my 200, my 210. And then August was my first month replacing myself as an associate or with an associate. We did about 240 that month. And, my practice ever since has kind of been between this range of 220 to 240. And I sort of reached this hard realization that I'm out of space. So I have 8 ops. And, a year ago, I was doing like 110. So I definitely ran out of space. And so I bought a lot. If you guys have heard, I've bought a lot. And I'm building a 19 operatory practice that'll be ready in about a couple of years, a little bit less than 2 years. So in the meantime, my practice will kind of hover around 220 to 240. And for me, I felt like I finally got my victory lap and believing in myself, everything that I did, at this point in my life, yeah, it's amazing. It's incredible. Yeah, when I tell this story, it's almost hard to believe that I had those moments, and I did, and they sucked. And there you have it, right? 2.5 times in 2 years, exactly 2 years. The 25th month after I bought my practice, we did more than 2.5 times, almost 3 times. So that's it. And honestly, I felt like I did it in 9 months. I felt like between July of 19 and March of 20, which was going to be my 220 month, I felt like I did it in 9 months. And that's about how long it takes. It takes about 9 to 12 months. But year one was brutal. It was just everything that industry standard is. Very difficult, very little growth, frustrated people on Facebook, everyone focusing on how to do things. And year two was a whole different experience. It was this ease, this calmness, this focus, this doing a few things well, and this believing in the path. I mean, December of 19, I sat there and I said, my goal in 20 is to do 2 mil. And with COVID, we will still do 2 mil in 20, which for me is really cool. I sat there in 19 and said 2 mil, having no clue if I could do it or not, but I believed in myself. And, I think that's one thing that we're really big on is creating a huge goal that you truly believe in and just trying your best to do it. And so that's my story. And I'll talk about what that's done to our company and how that impacts what we do. But I want to remind you, if I'm some random person, I'm some 27-year-old guy. If I could double my practice in a year, what could you do? Think about that. Expand your idea of what's possible. Because I guarantee more than you think is possible is possible. I think I just showed you. Our mission at Shared Practices 2.0, is to change your life. If that seems big, it is. We want to help you realize and maximize your dreams. In our words, redefining average. We have a really big issue with average. Average in this industry is honestly, I can't even believe it. 600 to 75K in production collections, that's average. $486,000 standard deviation. So that means 70% of practices are sub 1.1. Over 50% of practices are sub 675. Yeah, that's just not okay with me. I mean, I think so much more is possible in life, outside of your life, and your practice has so much to do with your whole life. And so as a company, we stand for dentists fulfilling their wildest dreams. I sat there October of 18 and said, I'm making a lot of money and I don't want to do it this way. I want to do it another way. And we want to change the definition of average in our field. We want shared practices average to have its own meaning. Redefine average. Average in dentistry, not okay with it at all. So our philosophy, our way is that we start with you. Think about the who, what, how hierarchy. The first step is your mindset, the way you think about your practice, the decisions you make, the way you are as an owner, the way you think, the way you feel, everything about it. That's where this starts. And so that's where our mastermind comes in. It's our peer-to-peer group environment where we help each other see, because we see practice very differently than everyone else. And if we don't have that type of community, then there's no way to remain focused. There's no way to stick through the hard times. In Mastermind, I post my biggest challenges and I post my biggest successes. And vulnerability and success and failure, they're both hard on either side. And Mastermind gives us that environment. We had Todd Haskins. He posted this cool picture of sushi, and he had just hired his first full-time associate, and it was a victory for him. Something he'd been building for a long time. And that's Mastermind. People that are all pursuing it all in one group. Analytics-based coaching, that's really the next step. So if you think about the who, what, how hierarchy, right? Mastermind is sort of our who down at the bottom, and coaching is where we work one-on-one with practices to figure out what and then help them with the how. And so the next step, after you have the right mindset, you're a part of Mastermind, you're interacting, you have what we call the shared practices philosophy, analytics-based practice management, you're believing in the practice long-term, then it's what? What do we do in your practice to aggressively grow in 9 to 12 months? And I mean, for me to explain our philosophy, it takes me hours. But if I could tell it in a succinct way, it's a strategic risk. So imagine like Moneyball in baseball. We have analytics in basketball. All of these things, analytics has changed the way we play the game. And our practice management philosophy, our analytics, everything we've learned from knowing and studying analytics at the extent that we have, has changed the way we play the game. So growth that's possible with us is not considered possible by a lot of people. I mean, I just told you 110 to 220 in 9 months. That's outside of what people think is normal. It's 9 to 12 months of staying committed to a philosophy that's very different and unique. It's really based on based on retention, based on patient flow, based on just kind of getting those things in place and understanding your practice. And we have these things called practice avatars. So you can compare your practice to the type of practice you want to go to, so we can see where specifically your practice is missing. It's a lot to explain. We'll have an event in April in Phoenix for 2 days where we'll explain the whole thing so you can understand it. I just don't have that kind of time right now. But analytics-based practice management is a philosophy by which we all live by, we coach by, and the how of it all, after we figured out the what using our philosophy, is we have our coaching team, which is really former office managers that we've trained. So our training process is months long. We take a former office manager, we train them with our philosophy, all of our hows, our systems in place, and we ensure that their systems are working properly. So you'll hear a case study with a guy named James. He was on Practice Underwater, and I think he's here tonight. And he had a huge AR issue. And I'm a dentist. He's a dentist. We're trying to coach. AR issue is not getting touched. You get our former office managers on it. Yeah, he's almost cut his AR days in half. So I think he started with like 90 AR days, and now we're at like 55. He's had a big AR problem for a long time. I'm not the guy to handle it. And that's what our coaches offer that I don't. And they offer the ability to work directly with your staff. I think we've learned that so much of what we do is dependent on staff. And so we can help your team directly. We can get to know them. We can talk to your office managers, and we can actually help you implement stuff. That's made things go so much smoother. And so our two offerings, with coaching, you get Mastermind plus coaching. And so in the way Mastermind works is we have everyone broken up into pods. So you're with a pod leader. And so that pod leader is someone we've distinguished as someone that's been successful at your model, either solo, group. We're opening up a multi-practice pod. And so you have a monthly call with your pod, a very private community, a Facebook community where we post. There's a Slack channel on there. And then Matt does a hot seat every month. He puts one practice on the hot seat, and we all as a mastermind will like grill that hot seat. With my hot seat, that was actually when I realized that I ran out of space and I had to split shift my team and then buy a lot and move. So all of that came from my hot seat, and you get to see our hot seats are really cool. And then I do a Q&A every month with all the mastermind members. And then we include PBN and Swell. So Practice by Numbers is the analytics software we use. And then Swell is the Google review service. We think every practice should have these services. So we just include them in the fee. And so we really feel like it's about $475 a month if you throw those fees in there, but the true price is $975, including those two services. On top of that, coaching is everything that you get with Mastermind. Plus, you get a one-on-one coaching call with our coach determining what to do in your practice. And then we actually help you do that thing. And so our coaching fee that we want to charge long-term is $2,500 a month. And this was what I said earlier. We're raising our coaching fee. So until the end of November, we are honoring our current fee of $2,200 a month. If you sign up, we will honor that fee for your time as a client. But long-term, we'll be charging $2,500 a month for coaching. And, information for those, we have mastermind.sharedpractices.com and coaching.sharedpractices.com. And you'll get an email with me tomorrow with a replay of this webinar plus the links for those. But you can just go to our website as well. So we've blocked out the whole month of November. The way you sign up for these services is you schedule a discovery call. So like I said, our coaching, you get grandfathered in at the lower fee. Mastermind, we don't have an offer. We're not raising our fee. So and if you sign up in the month of November, we'll give you a month off. So your first month free. Now, let me talk about some case studies. So the one thing I don't want you to take away from this is, well, I don't want a group practice. I don't want to do 200K per month. I'm not a shared practice client. It's like, our philosophy applies to all types of practices. So I'm going to show you 3 case studies of 3. These are 3 of our longest standing clients. So we have Ike as a solo dentist. We have Jason Katie. They did a solo to group transition is what we call it. So when you take a solo office and you turn it into a group practice, so you take a 1 dentist office, turn it into a 2 dentist office. And then we have James, who's a practice underwater guest. And he had a group practice with an associate that he then turned into a, more humming group practice with an associate. So Ike, he walked into his practice. Him and I are classmates. So he walked into this practice, and this is his PBN snapshot from July of 18. And he was doing 30K per month. And this month, October, right? This is like one of the worst months in dentistry, apparently. Ike is doing about I actually pulled this up yesterday night. So yesterday night, not today's production, yesterday night, he was doing 111. Hope he doesn't mind me sharing. And he'll do about 136 this month. So that's about 4.5 times his practice has grown in the last 2 years. Solo dentist. He works 3 days a week, a solo practice. For him, we're trying to go, we call it 2 over 1. So we're trying to push him to 2 million as a solo. Jason Katie, here they are. I should start taking pictures of people. I think this is a much better testimonial slide. So Jason Katie bought a practice September of, I think their first month might have been September, and it was doing about 600K. I think that's roughly the number. And for them, so these are gross production fees. So that top number, gross production, is the gross production. That's the one I told you about. And so if you look at their adjusted production, 51K when they started, 57 in collections. And then month 12, they're doing about 120 per month, 147K in collections. And for me, I feel this is very similar to my first year or my second year, 2.5 times. They grew about 2.5 times in a year, and they got almost all of that growth in the last 3 months before their 1-year mark. And that's very typical for this type of practice. Is it takes 9 to 12 months. This isn't like you hire us and next month you're 2.5 times bigger. That's not the way this works. James, so if you go back to the practice underwater, the very first one, it's one of my favorite practice underwater interviews because I actually coached this guy, and it was cool because so he was doing about 91 in November of 19. And that was the one we included in the snapshot. We did the interview in December. And so we always used the previous full month. And then in August, he did 156. That was kind of where he was humming at about 140 to 150-ish level. And then he actually was closed for a majority of COVID. He had one of the longer closing periods. And so for him, his September, October was not super conducive to where his practice is at. That's why I use August. But, for him, he's had crazy growth in his practice. And it's funny, if you listen to that practice underwater interview, one of my favorite things is how he was talking about how he just felt like his practice was stuck and it just couldn't move. And now that you know my story, you understand why I was so excited to help him, because this is what I feel our coaching and everything that we do is about, is when you see a version of yourself and like, I've been there. Ask me how I know. That's where that statement comes from. I've been there. I can help you get here. And that's what we're about. My mission is I've been in all different places. I've been successful financially doing it someone else's way, not my way, not my thing. I've quickly grown a practice with poor infrastructure, done that. My practice tanked because of poor infrastructure and poor just long-term planning. But October of 18, I made a big change and I started going for my vision. And I've had super unprofitable periods. I've been stuck, but what never left me since October of 2018 is going for it all. And yeah, I got to see my vision come to life, and it hits you like a ton of bricks. It's everything I've talked about on the show, on ads. Man, when you see it come to, you never expect it. I mean, we talked about James. I remember I had to almost smack him. I'm like, dude, you're there. Like, this is it. You are here. And he wouldn't believe me until he saw his financial statement. And there's no experience that matches the thrill of really going for your goals. That's one thing that is so true to us at Shared Practices, everything that we are is going all in on whatever you want. We're all in. That's what we are. And whatever success financially means for you is exactly how it means for us. That's our purpose. That's our goal, is to empower you to redefine average and to go for it all. Whatever it is you want. What does your perfect picture look like? However that looks like to you is exactly how it looks like to us. We don't prescribe your way of doing things. You bring us the thing you want, nothing off the table. I can have whatever I want. You bring that to us. We help you make it happen. So we want to define success for you because I think it sometimes gets misconstrued. Success is not for those who achieve what we think success is. It's those who go for it. Those who truly jump in to pursue their dreams. At Shared Practices, that's our definition of success. When I was sitting there struggling immensely in my practice, I was going for it. I've always gone for it ever since October of 2018. Go for it. There's no experience like it. You know, we're all going to fail. I failed miserably for a 6-month period. We're all going to fail. It's so much better to fail doing the thing you want the way you want to do it than failing at something that you don't even want to do in the first place. Ask me how I know on both of those. It's a whole lot better failing doing it your way. So I'll leave you guys with this, that success, it's not an accident. It's a choice. I've said this over and over again. It's one of the mantras that's truest to who I am as a human is you have two choices. You know, you can do nothing different and keep going along. I don't know any of you, right? I don't know who's here. I know there's a certain number of people here. If you're doing the same thing as you'll do tomorrow that you did yesterday, you're probably going to get the same results. That's just common sense, good or bad. If that's a good thing, then great. You keep doing a good thing. If you're unhappy with that, you'll probably continue to be unhappy with that. So for me, October of 2018, I exercised trust and I believed in something different. And I do believe I'm leading a redefinition of average. And I encourage you to join us. You know, what you choose, I'll leave that up to you. How you take what I've shared tonight, I'll leave up to you. But, you know, I think we at Shared Practices wholeheartedly believe in our way of doing things and our way of practicing, of going for it all. So thank you. I'm going to answer the Q&A now. I'll set a timer, or maybe a time. I don't know if timer's right, but I'll do about 30 minutes of a Q&A, and we will. So if you want to sign up for Mastermind, you can schedule a discovery call with Alex Sharp. He's our director of Mastermind. Mastermind.sharedpractices.com, and then coaching.sharedpractices.com for coaching. I'm going to see the questions we have here in the Q&A. How are you collecting more than you are producing? So yes, there is going to be a, this is going to be sent out afterwards. So I am almost exactly on an hour. That's super solid. Okay. So yes, recording is going out afterwards. So I answered live. Okay. So collecting more than you're producing. So that's what I said. Anonymous attendee who asked that question, you know, when you really are growing so quickly and your months are like super crazy, like mine were for the first 2 years, you know, I very much had the experience of crazy amount of collections, totally unrelated to the amount my adjusted production, because there's like a 3-month lag sometimes with insurance and stuff happens, and sometimes you do payment plans. So, you know, collections, there's a big lag. So when I say, what do you mean by new patient quality? So we actually measure new patient quality. We have metrics that we use to measure new patient quality. It's one of the things we look at when we look at a practice. And a big part of it is looking at their diagnosis off of new patients. So if you looked at one of the biggest things that went wrong, and I'm super excited, I'll do analytics-based practice management 2-day course in April, and you'll see me actually show my PBN snapshots of the honeymoon phase as it's happening. One of the biggest things that was happening was my new patient numbers were fine, but we weren't diagnosing anything off of those new patients because their quality was so low. They weren't coming in looking for stuff. And so ultimately it led to this situation where we just weren't performing well off of new patients, and it wasn't sustainable production. So the patient experience during the office visit or patient demographics, it's more about the amount you diagnose off of the patient itself. So Greg, I hope that answers your question. What is your biggest factor in improving new patient flow in those 9 months? Yeah, so I changed my marketing. So I, we had done a lot of postcard direct mail to date So I'd send out like these $89 new patient specials, and they were just super, I don't know, they didn't work for me. They didn't work in my area. I don't know what it was. I feel like marketing, sometimes it's so area specific. Some things work really well for some people, didn't work well for me. And we ultimately switched to a more comprehensive like magazine look. That was a big piece of it. And then we also stopped offering that new patient special, which was also a big piece of it, because then those patients that were low quality weren't making appointments. And then we replaced those with patients that wanted to come to us for reasons outside of cost. So I think it was switching our marketing from cost based to just experience based marketing. So I answered live, done. Okay. Would you ever coach a client who has software not integrated with PBN? I'd love to become a client, but we use Curve and I can't see us switching to PMS anytime soon. That's a great question. I'd have a conversation with Susanna, our director of coaching. So I do have one client right now who does not have PBN, but he will be getting PBN. So, if there's, I think she's done coaching with reports and all that stuff. I would send that to her. And then we can sort of see how that goes. I won't answer for our coaching department on that one, but my hope is yes, but I'm not totally sure. PBN is a big part of what we do. Is there any specifically for students who are not practice owners yet? So if I was a student listening to this webinar, I think one of the things I would take away is figure out what you want, be honest with yourself, right? If I think back to my time as a student, I graduated from dental school thinking that I wanted to be a full-time solo dentist. Yet all of the things I was super passionate about in dental school were about owning and running a practice. And so if I could go back in time and give myself advice as a student, I would share the story of that I just shared right now. And one of the things I'd hope you take away from it as a student or a pre-owner is, wow, like this guy totally could have learned all of these things about himself before he had bought a practice. I mean, if you talk about the number of pivots I made, right? I change everyone's lives with pivots, and like that's a big part of what we do is how fast things change. And my life has probably been the biggest amount of change since I bought my practice. And I could have listened to myself sooner in what I wanted and started making decisions that way. And so I think that, being true to yourself is one of the most important things that you could ever do. And I would definitely give that advice to any dental student. I wish I had spent more time in dental school learning about what interests me, what doesn't, and then having that dictate which way I go in practice ownership. So pre-ownership dentists. So we actually are opening up a shared practices mastermind for pre-owners in January. So if you're a pre-owning dentist, then we have that. We also have shared practices. We have due diligence services. So if you're looking at a practice, you need someone to do a financial analysis of it. It's a paid service, and you actually go through it, and we'll be like the buyer's rep for you essentially. And that's a smooth transition into coaching, because then we're coaching you pre-ownership and then we can coach you in ownership. It's a very fluid way to become a client. So what are my thoughts about buying abandoned properties or fixer-uppers? I found a doctor's office that closed a few years ago because the doctor passed away. Oh man, that scares me, Alex. Yeah, I don't like anything about that. I would not go for that. I'd find a practice that's much more predictable than that. If I had bought a practice has been closed for a few years, I'm not having this webinar telling you I did well. That would be a whole nother webinar. Probably more interesting, but don't want to give it. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. No, I mean, so Derek, you're right. I did not have coaching, and I achieved all this growth without coaching. I wish I had coaching. If I had had coaching, imagine what would happen in my practice if I had a shared practices coach working with me from the day I bought my practice. It would be a totally different story. I would not have had that miserable first year. My first year would have been my second year. And, so yeah. So I think for me, it was hard. I had, right. Like, and that's part of the, like Matt calls it the thought leader tax. It's like one of my motivating factors is creating the thing that I needed back when I needed it. And so, no, I mean, I didn't have anybody to teach me the philosophy that I was creating. Like, it's kind of the point of what we do, is so that people don't have to experience that, because it sucks. So with discussing the importance of new patient flow and quality, how important do you believe demographics had been to your rapid growth? Honestly, not super important. I mean, right, like I wasn't doing a startup. We've achieved the same results in practices of all kinds of demographics. I don't know. I thought demographics, I picked a spot that has good demographics, and I didn't have good new patient flow for a year. So I don't know. I've been on both sides of that equation. I I don't know if demographics have a whole lot to do with it or not, but we haven't run into that issue with our clients in our pool. How did you attract high quality patients? Yeah. So we removed cost-based marketing. So a lot of our marketing was cost-based, low cost was our attractive, and we changed our messaging to high quality care and great experience. So Mastermind Coaching, if you're a dental student. So Seth, that's a great question. I think we realized a while ago that we need to cater to all of our people in our audience. So we have, for students, we have upcoming a student mastermind, a student academy. We have a pre-owner academy, pre-owner mastermind coming up. And then we have ownership academy, ownership mastermind, and ownership coaching. So we are trying to appeal to our entire audience so that they can begin to develop mindset and begin developing the way that they should be looking at practice acquisitions, their futures, and everything like that. So we are currently working on that. That should come out at the beginning of the year, so January. So for those of us who are still associates, would there be a mastermind for pre-owners? So I've asked, man, this is a popular question. Yes, there will be a mastermind for pre-owners. Email Matt. Matt. Email Matt. There's a waiting list right now. I think we have like 25 or 30 people on the waiting list for that mastermind. So email Matt if you want to get on that waiting list, and then you'll be notified, and then we'll set up discovery calls with you or whatever is needed to get started on pre-owner mastermind. Maybe not the wormhole you want to get down, but you said there's probably not been 100. Is that different in accounting loss in your mind? I've been so many accounting reports on Big Practice showing. Yeah. Very different than an accounting loss. So an accounting loss is like when I'm doing my tax returns and I want to show that I made no money, I'll like fluff up my expenses and pay myself a salary. I actually lost money. So there's a big difference. Like my tax returns were like, I paid like very good. I had a very good tax situation after, if those 3 months were extrapolated to the whole year. Because I lost money for those. So like, no, it's you work a full month, you don't pay yourself, in your business checking account is less money than you started. So you work the whole month and paid to do so. That's very rare. The big losses you're seeing on P&Ls are people trying to do well on taxes. Very different. I participate with 12 insurances, PPOs. Actually, I have. That was one thing that surprised Matt when we did the hot seat. He was surprised at my fees. My fees are not high. We do $70 cleanings, $68 cleanings, whatever it is, the Delta fee. I don't even know what it is. I know it's low. I hate it. And half of my practice is on that super low insurance. So nope, not a high fee practice. We participate with almost every PPO. Most. What is my new build out cost? Unrelated question. I will not answer it. Millions of dollars. It is more than $2 million. It is about 4. So there we go. That's my build out cost, $4 million. I'm purchasing a practice and I start in March 21st. What is a good time to consider? So Jackson, I really wish I had started coaching when I had bought my practice. And that's why we have the due diligence into ownership sort of pathway for people, is that you need somebody to do your financial due diligence anyway. So we offer it for a very affordable cost so that you can then transition well into ownership with our coaching department. And then we can start forming a strategy, and then we kind of go very smoothly into ownership. So Jackson, I would highly recommend, starting with due diligence. When you start with due diligence and you sort of ease into coaching, it's a very smooth transition. That's why we have those pre-owner services. So if you've already subscribed to PBN and Swell, so we take over that expense for you. So we will actually, they'll bill us instead of billing you. That's the way this works when you have PBN and Swell. And, if you're, and then if you've prepaid, it makes it a lot more complicated, and we handle that on a case-by-case basis. So you said that you saw signs of slow it down, and so I was a PBN power user. And so what that means is I used to look at value added. And so I used to look at, when I had a month, I would say, how much did we produce? How much did we collect? And how much did we add? And, I would say that I was all of a sudden in the month of December, I realized that I produced a lot more than I'd scheduled forward. And then I was like, oh crap, that's not a good sign. That's the first time that had happened to me, because I was growing so quickly. I was always producing and then scheduling more the next month. And then we would just keep doing more. And then that was the first time I saw the opposite trend of like, we did 120K in 3 weeks in December. And then we scheduled like 75. And I was like, whoa, that's not good. And it wasn't. That's how I knew. And I didn't know why. All I knew was that we were going to have a bad February. And I had no idea why until June of 19. And we got the questions coming. So industry standard for coaching. Yeah, I don't want to speak for any other company. I don't want to say what other people can do. And I'm not even promising 2.5 times. Like, I think that would be a ridiculous thing to promise from our coaching department. Like, yeah, that would be a hard thing to promise for them. That's a big expectation. I mean, I think for us, you know, I think a $3 to $1 invested return, I think we feel is very easy for our company. So if you'll get $3 of growth for every dollar you invest with us in 9 to 12 months over that period of time. I think for us, that's like a super, like, we could do that with everyone pretty easily. I can promise that one. Don't think we can promise much more than that. Because I don't know. Like, I think at the end of the day, right, coaching is like, we'll tell you what to do, and we'll help your team, and we'll do everything on our end. But every client is different, and I don't know what you're bringing to the table as a client, so I can't really say. That's up to you as much as it is up to us. So, what did you do in dental school to learn about practice ownership? Yeah. So, oh man, a lot of stuff. Did you just go for it without knowing much about ownership? No, I actually spent a lot of time, like thousands of hours, studying practice ownership. And it was really, yeah, it was kind of like this exhausting thing that never ended. And, it just, yeah, I mean, I did everything, every CE course I could, every podcast I could listen to. But I mean, now I feel like I was in dental school. I mean, I'm not like old, but I mean, that was like 5 or 6 years ago that I did all that studying and stuff about practice ownership. And the resources that are available now are so much different and better. So, I mean, other than having lots of time to think about it, what helped you come to a realization that you no longer wanted to practice clinical dentistry? Yeah, I think that's a great question. It was really just, yeah, the space, man. I had so much space, and I sat there and thought about it, and I got to experience, I think COVID gave me the experience of what it was like. And I just said, this is what I was supposed. I just, when you feel like something is just right, it just felt right. I didn't feel like I wanted to go back at all. The more I thought about going back, the more it just got a pit in my stomach about it. So it's kind of how I knew. And when you have those realizations, you can either suppress them and not listen to them, or you can go for them. I went for it. So knowing what you know now, what type of practice would you buy if you were starting again as a new grad? Go bigger from the start? Great question, Brandon. If I was starting from a new grad, that was about the biggest practice I could buy. I mean, I don't know of another new grad that bought a practice over $1 million out of school. I mean, hopefully there are some, but that was a really hard loan to get. Knowing what I know, again, I'd buy a $2 million practice and start there, and with more ops, so I wouldn't have to move so quickly. But that would require like a year of an associateship. So that doesn't work for the new grad, but that works for a lot of other people. For my vision, right? Yeah, philosophy, of course, it caters to PPO and fee for service. It's a retention-based philosophy. I mean, it's very retention. I mean, I think retention is a very big part of our philosophy, even more important in a fee for service practice. I don't think people realize, like, I've had 7 dentists in my practice in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, and no, 2.5 years, 7 dentists. And we've grown in patient flow. My sellers were losing twice as many patients every month as we lose. And we've thrown all different kinds of dentists at them, and it's, yeah, the retention in our philosophy is really powerful, and what's possible there. So, I think it caters to, yeah, fee for service, and retention is even more important because you're at a disadvantage inherently because you don't take their insurance. So I would say our philosophy is actually better for a fee for service practice. What could you have done differently if you restarted your journey of practice ownership? Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is I would have started, if I could have, I don't even like to think about what is possible. If I had started my whole 2 years of ownership with the lens that I wear now, where I'd be a year in the future from where I'm at today. That would be really cool, but it didn't happen for me. I got to pay thought leader tax. So you're welcome. So what do you think I start coaching if I close on a practice? Yeah, I mean, I honestly think, man, the due diligence that we have into coaching is the way to go. I really believe in that process of having our team understanding your practice, vetting it before you buy it, making sure there are no red flags. You're going to pay someone for due diligence. You might as well, I think we're one of the most affordable offerings for that. And the whole point of us doing that is so that we can have a smooth transition into ownership with our clients. We're not trying to, gouge people for due diligence. We're trying to get into ownership with them and have them be on the right page, the same page with us. So do you see any differences in success of growth in rural versus urban, suburban? So I'm urban, suburban. Rural is easier. Whew, wish I was rural. Um, yeah, I mean, I would say, the majority of our clients are all suburban or urban. We don't have a lot of dentists, right? We talk to a group of dentists that want to go for it all and want everything they want in life and all that stuff. So like I think it's kind of hard to say like I get a lot of rural clients because typically someone who's Alex Sharp is I would call him rural. He's in a town of 30,000. He's our director of Mastermind. Obviously the philosophy works well for him. I think he has huge capacity issues. He can't get anyone in. So I think I don't see. I think it's easier to be successful in a rural area most likely. But I definitely would not say do that for that reason. You got to do what makes you happy. Man, I'm knocking these out. 27 down, 15 minutes left. You guys keep asking questions. It's one of the, I remember last time it was like this intimidating thing of like so many questions and I kept knocking them out. So I got 15 more minutes of these. What's the biggest hurdle for most owners transitioning from productive solo to group? Yeah, the ugly duckling is what we call it. So that 6-month period where I was losing money was an exaggerated ugly duckling. And so there is a period where you have to really like just kind of have stomach lining for the ugly duckling phase. And so we have clients who are like, hey, you're in the ugly duckling. And on the phone calls, they know they're on the ugly duckling and they're being patient with it. And that's what mindset does for you. Having the right mindset as a leader helps you bear those difficult times. It's a lot like investing in stocks. When you imagine if every time it was low, you sold and they're like, that'd be the worst strategy ever. And you'd lose a lot of money. That's kind of what owners do when they run their practice. When the stock market's down, they need stomach lining to stick through that period of time. They just don't, and they kind of quit, go back to solo, and they don't want to go to a group, and they say, I don't want an associate, and all the issues they'll complain about. And it's really having the stomach lining, and a lot of our coaches encouraging them. There's a monthly call because we keep encouraging them to stay along the path and believe in it. That's the hardest part, is sticking with it when it's not easy. Our philosophy is not for everyone. It's for those that have the stomach lining. And it's not like you'll lose money like I did. I don't think like Jason Katie did the solo to group transition, and they had great months. But there was times where they're like, our staff costs are a little high. And I'm like, yeah, they're a little higher than normal. Like, we're an ugly duckling. Let's just keep going. And that was about the extent of it's a lot milder now. But I went through, when I went through, it was brutal. I wouldn't recommend it for anyone. On the Dental Student Vibes podcast. Okay. I'll be there on the Dental Student Vibes podcast. Thanks, Seth. Does Mastermind work for a brand new startup? We actually are opening up a startup pod. So I think it's great. We actually have a lot of, so Kashavi Patel is in our mastermind. She's a solo pod leader over there. She did a startup. We actually have a few startups in there. Shared practices is becoming more startup oriented than you might think. So yes, I think we've learned that startup has its application, especially for like a large group. It makes a lot of sense to do a startup sometimes. So yes, we have startup people in our pod, and we'll open up a startup pod at some point. I think that's more of a pre-owner thing though. If you're doing the startups, if you're opening a startup, and then if you're a brand new startup, then you're in the solo pod where there are startup people that have been there. So a person in a bad financial position and your coaching has certain criteria of how a person can join. Also, how can PBN work in the Australian market? So any specific questions like that, I would schedule a discovery call and you can ask them at that time. And then, we'll be able to address that. If you have, I'm actually not sure PBN in different countries. That's a great question for Rohit. A lol. That's a question. Daniel, come on. Since your growth is insane, do you anticipate dropping insurances? No. I plan on, right. So I have roughly 2 years, a little less than 2 years before I move. So I'm trying to move into a 19-op facility. So dropping insurance would not be the way I'd want to go. I'm trying to really grow my patient base so that when I move into my new facility, I can then continue growing. It sucks because 3 million is a number I really want to do, and I don't think I will until we move to the new facility. Maybe, hopefully I'm wrong. Maybe 2021 we'll do it, but I think 2022 I'll have to wait till then. Cost of financial due diligence. I'm not gonna. I guess I quoted fees. Yeah, we charge about, I think it's like a little under 2K. I think that's roughly the fee of due diligence. There's 2 phases. So I think they both come out to roughly under 2K. And that's for when you have the practice selected that you want. There's phase 1, we're making sure there's no red flags. And then we have a phase 2. I believe it's roughly 2,000. But you have to, again, I'm not totally sure. All right. So maybe your practice is based on volume versus number of patients. Yeah. So how many patients approximately per day, hygienists and dentists? So we believe in a 2-to-1 philosophy. So 2 hygienists for 1 dentist. So we have 2 dentists, 4 hygienists as much as possible. Sometimes we'll have 3 hygienists with 2 dentists. So yeah. So patients per day, I mean, I don't know, what's that? 31 hygiene patients, maybe like 28 to 30. Is that right? Sounds about right. If you describe your perfect workday, what are you doing? I'm on a webinar and I'm talking about shared practices. That is my perfect workday. Yeah, I mean, I'm a full-time entrepreneur now, so I don't really go into the office a whole lot. An ideal day for me is a lot of phone calls, a lot of strategic planning. I really like those 2 things. Thanks for the question, anonymous attendee. It's funny. I'm by myself. I'm not even reading the chat. So if anyone's having fun with me, I'm solo right now. So Megan's asking if I recommend coaching long-term. So it's funny. I think like if you think back to the growth that we get for clients and how much we charge, and we're doing stuff for you, for your team, like a lot of our coaches will put out ads to hire people and all that stuff for you. It's like, I don't know. I mean, we haven't lost very many clients. We also haven't been doing this for years upon years. But yeah, it's our goal. So when we create a coaching service, it's our goal to be of value to a client so that they never want to drop us. That's our intention. We're month to month. We're not a contract company. And so we have to prove it, over and over again that we're worth our fee. And that's the way we want to operate. So, I mean, I would think that for me, if coaching is helpful and we can help your team train and we can talk to them, but maybe there's a time when you outgrow it and you stick in Mastermind long term. I think that's more your thing than my thing, your question to answer. But personally, yeah, I would think coaching is a long-term thing. How do you feel about small group private practice? From what I've heard of podcasts, sounds like SP promotes more of a single doc ownership model and eventually bringing on associates. So small group private practice. I'm assuming you mean partnerships. It's got to be the right situation. I'm assuming this is a partnership question. It's just got to be the right situation. Do you recommend building or buying? I think it depends on your goals. I am very biased towards acquisitions. I'm almost going to finish the questions. Cool. Did you have a slower new patient flow when you realized it was going slow down? And I think I was between 30 to 50 new patients for the majority of my time as an owner. I think I really lived in that area. I think now we're like maybe 60 to 70, but for the most part, we still stay in that area. What books do I recommend for pre-owners? Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big book guy. I mean, there's all the standard ones. I don't know. I'd read the standard books that everyone else talks about. Extreme Ownership, Good to Great, all that stuff. I don't know. I think there's good books. I'm not a big book guy. Probably not the guy to ask that question to. Shared practices provide services in the West too, California, Arizona, Nevada, etc. Well, I'm located in Phoenix. Our company is based out of Phoenix. We provide services to the entire United States, probably Canada as well. And I'm not sure about Australia. I haven't thought about that. If they're PBN compatible, then yes. So yeah, we offer services in the West. What is the overhead with this model? I mean, it's not a model. I mean, I don't think we're a model. I mean, our way of thinking about overhead is break even. And so, your break even point, now, however much you produce past that. I mean, the overhead with this model, I think our overhead is, overhead is such a, you couldn't have asked me a question that I dislike more about overhead. Just not my thing. I really feel like it's such a belabored topic in dentistry. But I mean, your overhead, it's very typical. I mean, like by the time your practice is settled down and you've grown into the proper size, and your overhead is very industry standard. You're just a much larger practice. So you'll if you're, a group practice, a 20 to 25% EBITDA is pretty typical for us. So take home, I mean, I think we like 600K for a group practice owner, 400 for a solo. I think we like those numbers. I take home. Percentage, I don't know about a percentage, but that's income. So do you think it's possible to graduate, buy a practice, and run it the way you did, working on 0.5 to mix immediately? No. I mean, maybe, probably. I mean, everything's possible, right? But I think there was a lot of benefits to me being in my practice early on and then phasing out after I was able to establish culture. Obviously, people own practices as absentee owners all the time. It's definitely possible. I think that's biting off a lot, but totally possible. What was the allure to you doing a group versus solo practice? Why not the lean and mean model? Oh. Man, these anonymous attendees coming in with the questions. Lean and mean. Okay. Matt, if you're in the chat, like throw something out there for lean and mean. That's a personal pet peeve of mine is that model. It just feels very doctor dependent to me. Solo practice, yeah, I just didn't like having it be so dependent on me. I really liked the idea of creating something that could run without me and serve my life as opposed to me serving the business. And so I feel like solo practices is really owning a job. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people want to own a job. I didn't want to own a job. I wanted to own a business. And so I grew a group practice where I had the business work for me as opposed to me working in the business. And so lean and mean, the way I hear lean and mean is I'm going to understaff my practice, not have enough infrastructure, and be working really hard to keep it going because I don't have enough people. That's what I hear when I hear lean and mean. I just don't like that model. It's very philosophically against some of the things I like. What advice do you have for a dental student who might, to knowing that clinical dentistry might not be their love, like your COVID pivot? Ugh. Man, I would try to figure out what about dentistry you enjoy. I enjoy a lot about dentistry. It's just clinical dentistry I don't enjoy. And so I would try figuring out what about dentistry is exciting to you and interesting to you and do that. This field has all kinds of possibilities and things that you can do. Coming up on my 30 minutes, I'm going to pick the 2 best ones I got left. And, okay. So let's see what we got here. We got, as a non-clinical, what % of collections are you shooting to take home? Yeah, I don't like talking about my income. I feel like that's kind of, I'm pretty transparent, but I think income related questions I typically don't like talking about publicly. I'm not Macarino. I don't air that stuff out there. Interested in signing up with buyer representation, look at a practice. I'm interested in coaching. Can I call to check out how it works? I would shoot an email to the Suzanne. Let's see here. If you were an associate, and if you were an associate, how would you plan your resignation to switch over to ownership? Yeah, I mean, when I know my closing date, I would let them know what that is and try to be honest. If I have a 60-day or 90-day, I honestly, I wouldn't honor that stuff, to be honest. I'm probably not the best guy for that question. I don't like listening to rules. I totally would not honor my associate compensation stuff. When I knew when my closing date was, I'd let them know. And if that was not enough time for the contract, I would leave anyway. They can't handcuff me to come into the practice. Thoughts on, that's probably like the worst answer. Thoughts on best associate compensation strategy, offering associate equity. Yeah, Seth, they got a lot of stuff on that. I typically like a salary plus bonus, and then I don't offer equity at the moment. So do you define a group practice as 2 full-time doctors? Yes. So group practice is by definition multiple doctors in one practice, a group of dentists. So how much does a solo need to collect to give you the 400K take home? Usually 1 to 1.2, depending on their overhead. What grooms your beard? Do to yourself. Thanks, Matt. And then, so we send out a monthly magazine, and we send out about 15,000 of those a month, and we do it every door direct mail for that. And then how much of your increased production do you attribute to scheduling efficiency? Not much, actually. I love that question because it's a very common industry standard how question, right? Scheduling efficiency is going to grow my practice. It doesn't. Yeah, it's more based on, your diagnosis. I mean, if you're in a situation where you can't fit in a, if you can't fit patients in, then sure, you will have scheduling efficiency will come into play. But I think most people are not at that stage. So that's it, guys. I hope you had fun. Again, we have discovery calls going on this whole month. We have those, if you want to get grandfathered into our lower coaching fee, or if you want to sign up for the mastermind and get a month free. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I am signing off. Thanks, everyone. Let me check the chat. See how many messages are in this chat. 177. Oh, man. Richard, yeah, please consult an attorney before breaking your contract. All right. Thanks, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Mint vodka. See you guys.